Hi, in this video we'll be looking at some of the important aspects of analysing ancient written sources. Today we'll be looking at an excerpt from Plutarch's account of the famous Roman general Julius Caesar and his rival Pompey the Great. To provide a bit of context, Caesar, Pompey and Crassus formed the first triumvirate. After the death of Crassus and quite a few other events, Pompey and Caesar were at odds, which ultimately led to civil war. In this first section, we can see the use of the language long ago resolved upon the overthrow of Pompey. This suggests that Plutarch had insight into the mind of Caesar. How could Plutarch have known this? It's really likely that he didn't. In the second highlighted section, we can see that the language is suggestive of both Pompey and Caesar's motives and plans. What might be the purpose of this? Here, the writing contains some useful information, as we can infer from the quote, having till lately despised Caesar, that Pompey and Caesar were once friends, but the use of the word despised is very emotive and it's loaded with connotation. Finally, Plutarch portrays Caesar in quite a negative light, as though Caesar had planned all along he would need to resort to more extreme measures to defeat rivals such as Pompey. So what do we need to consider? Firstly, Plutarch was an ancient Roman writer. He wrote this account more than 100 years after the events took place, but as he had access to sources which have long been destroyed, we still need to consider this as a primary source. He was also a big supporter of Pompey, who was a member of the noble Roman class. Plutarch also lived in a time in which the Roman nobility were ruling the Roman Empire as emperors, governors and senators, so in the context of his time, any support for figures like Caesar could be considered treason. There are other things that we need to consider too. Plutarch didn't see himself as a historian when he was writing these accounts, and as you can see from the quote, his purpose was much more about telling great stories about individuals. This can create problems for historians when we try to construct the past from these written sources. Other things we need to consider when we're studying ancient history and analysing written sources is the language used by ancient writers. When we take into account that Plutarch wasn't writing for historical purposes, his writings would have been very entertaining to the Romans who read them. So we need to consider the emotive aspects of the writing, as well as the descriptions used. Is it overly descriptive or not descriptive enough? We also need to consider the use of language in regards to fact and opinion. In the excerpt we've looked at, you can see how several of the words used by Plutarch show his opinion regarding the thoughts and character of Caesar. Finally, is there any obvious exaggeration, and how does this then affect our view of the people and events being written about? Other things we need to consider to resolve these issues are other sources from the time. If we can find other sources from or around the time we're studying and compare those accounts to the one that we first looked at, we'll be able to much better verify whether it's a reliable source. If available, other written accounts are an excellent point of reference to further verify the information from the original source, but we sometimes come across the same problems in those sources. Another way to help here is by searching for archaeological evidence to back up the written accounts. Whilst they're not always readily available, when they are sometimes the only way to ensure your original source is reliable and accurate. Hopefully this will help you when analysing your ancient written sources in the future. Bye.